There was a lot of very loud singing and dancing and singing and yelling and praying in tongues, and a lot of "you're healed," laying on of hands, and people would fall out and convulse on the ground. It was very intense, very, very intense, but it was just all consuming for our lives.
Kendra Petty, thank you so much for coming on to Talk Beliefs from your home on the West Coast of the USA. You are an author and public speaker, also having worked your way up to become an executive vice president at 2 firms. Your new memoir, I Can't Believe I'm Not Dead, is out now. It's a story of growing up in a homegrown cult as well as an account of murder and even mafia involvement. It's quite a tale you have to tell, Kendra, but you survived, come through the other end, and now you're doing very well for yourself, aren't you?
Yes, I am, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here. It has definitely been a very wild ride during my life, a cycle of trauma and tragedy. But really, the book "I Can't Believe I'm Not Dead" has a very happy ending and talks about how I overcame and overcame just being a survivor and learned to thrive in life. So very happy to be on my path to healing and have peace, health, and happiness.
Well, it's a long and winding story, so let's start by going back to your growing up years. It all began on a farm in Oklahoma. Were things peaceful, at least at the very beginning?
From my memory dating back with my mother's mental illness, it was never peaceful. I was born on a farm in Oklahoma. I was not raised on the farm. The farm is still in our family. It's an important part of our family and heritage. But we left the farm very young. But while we were living on the farm, my father was raised Methodist. My mother was raised Baptist. Her father was a Baptist preacher. So there was a little bit of a tug of war of what religion we would follow with the birth of their kids, my parents' kids. And I was sprinkled Methodist, sprinkled or baptized Methodist. But when we left the farm and we started moving around Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, for my father to build his radio career, he was in radio for many years. We then converted to Baptist church, and for grades 1 through 6, we went to Baptist church. But life was always pretty tumultuous. My mother has mental illness. She struggles. Her whole life, unfortunately, has just been a struggle with mental illness. So it's always been fairly chaotic. But when I was 8 and my older brother, who was my best friend, was 10, he was killed in a very tragic accident. I was with him when it happened. And that event really just shifted the entire family dynamic. It created for me survivor's guilt, but worse than that, I blamed myself for his death because I lived and he didn't. It sent me into a lifetime of night terrors that just ramped up and got worse as I got older. I would find myself running out of my house, my hotel rooms, as I travel a lot for work, in the middle of the night in my sleep because of these night terrors, and waking up in strange places, going, "Where am I?" Because I'd been running in my sleep from the night terrors. It made my already mentally ill mother go even madder, and she became much more abusive. My father left us, my younger brother and myself and my mother. He left us. They got a divorce. So it was very chaotic before, but it became much more chaotic after my brother passed and my mother's mental illness ramped up. But after the divorce, my mother did remarry. She remarried the neighbor's, her best friend's husband, and they were our neighbors from across the street. Her best friend had died of cancer about a year after my brother died, and right around the time that my parents got divorced. And my mother married our neighbor, and he became my stepdad, and I inherited 2 stepsisters. And so my 2 stepsisters, myself, and my younger brother, we became a new family.
Well, it was around the age of 13 that your mom and stepdad decided to start up their own church in your house. So how did life change from this point on, and what was expected of you?
We went from being just your typical Sunday churchgoers at the Baptist church to all church all the time, and really kind of a whole different religion. My mom and my stepfather started a church in their home pretty soon after they got married. They really dove into the Bible, a lot of the Old Testament, but really dove into the Bible and just became immersed in it and started interpreting it very strangely. So they started a church in our house, and my stepfather was the pastor, and this grew and grew and grew until we outgrew our house, and we had to rent like a retail space for this church. That grew and grew and grew, and so then we rented a church, an actual church, a small church, and we grew and grew and grew. And then we hired a pastor, and so my stepfather stepped back from being a pastor, and we hired an actual pastor, and we bought a larger building. So it just continued to grow and grow and grow. Um, uh, this religion, it's hard to describe because it is really just an interpretation of my mother and her husband's thought process on the Bible, but I would liken it to non-denominational, charismatic, with really bizarre twists. So, for example, we weren't allowed to socialize with anyone outside of the church. We went to a Christian school, and then we had our Christian church. So we were studying the Bible during school, then we'd go home, we would study the Bible, read the Bible, pray as a family, then separately in our bedrooms. We'd go to church in the evenings, Sundays, church all day, but it was all Bible, all the time, all God. We weren't allowed to, as I said, associate with any people from the secular world. We weren't allowed to watch TV, read magazines and newspapers. We weren't allowed to listen to the radio. This religion facilitated even more abuse. There was beatings in the name of God. We weren't allowed to go to the doctor because they would pray over us and tell us God would heal us. So, the church services and even at home, there was a lot of very loud singing and dancing and singing and yelling and praying in tongues, and a lot of "you're healed," laying on of hands, and people would fall out and convulse on the ground. It was very intense, very very intense, but it was just all consuming for our lives. And so, as we all grew up and left home, being exposed to the real world was a real adjustment because all we knew was we weren't allowed to date, we weren't allowed to hang out with friends until really my senior year. Um, so we were all very naive when we left home because we had been grown up in a bubble in our formidable years. It was very oppressive. But during that time, my mother's mental illness continued to ramp up. So, I mentioned there was beatings in the name of God. My mother was very physically abusive, mostly of me. And I always thought she focused her abuse on me because I was with my brother when he died. And I felt like she blamed me because I blamed myself. So I felt like she blamed me. And that's why she focused her physical abuse on me. But she was very violent with me. She would choke me till I would black out. Just really cruel, brutal beatings. A lot of mental, verbal, emotional abuse. As things ramped up, every day became 911 with my mother. Every day became hair on fire. Every day, you never knew when it was going to happen or how it was going to happen, but there was going to be an extreme emotional outburst that would last for a very long time. She would throw things, she would break things, she would beat me. Um, she would try to jump out of the car while we're driving. If something made her upset, she would open the door. We could be on the highway, we could be on a road. She would try to jump out of the moving car, putting everyone else at risk. And I never really came to terms with, if God is supposed to be a loving God, why does my mother act like this and say it's in the name of God and say that it's okay? But we children, the four of us, were never allowed to show any emotion, no emotion. Not We couldn't get overexcited. We definitely couldn't get upset or angry or cry or even give each other dirty looks, or as siblings do over the dinner table. It was emotionless for us. She was the only one allowed to show emotion. But, she was not the only one that in our family that had mental illness. There was quite a number of people mostly on my mom's side, but some on my dad's side that dealt with mental illness. So it was really a recurring theme for us. And it was again hard for me to rectify all that we dealt with surrounding all this mental illness. Um, and combine that with religion and God is love and God heals, but yet so many people are sick in our family. And so my mother's mother, my grandmother, apparently was mentally ill her whole life. I never saw any of those symptoms because she was on lithium her whole life. My mother had a brother who spent his entire adult life in a mental institution, and he died there just a few years ago. My dad had a brother, same thing. His entire adult life was spent in a mental institution, and he died there a number of years ago. I had my stepsister, who's a few years older than me, had brain damage at birth. So she was very aggressive, had a hard time controlling her temper. So she would also beat me up. And that's the only time my mom ever came to my rescue or helped me out was when my stepsister was beating me up. And so she would jump in to stop it, thank goodness. But I always thought it was because my mom didn't want her edging in on her turf. So the family dealt with a lot of mental illness. My sister, we put her in institutions, in and out of institutions as a teenager, and she would run away in the middle of the night. We get a call from the sheriff's department that she's run away, and there'd be a search for her. They would always find her. She's really healed a lot, and she's so much better now. But she had a lot to deal with in her teenage years. But we spent a lot of time. If we weren't in church, I felt like we were at hospitals or mental institutions visiting family members. So it was really inherent in how we grew up and around us. And I could never rectify and justify if God will heal you, why isn't He healing these people who are very sick?
Well, at age 18, you finally decided to leave this tumultuous, abusive home life and strike out on your own. So, how did this come about, and what were those initial months like for you out in the big bad world?
When I was 17, nearing the end of my junior year, I had an opportunity to go abroad and do missionary work. So I went to Haiti for the summer to do missionary work, and it was an exciting opportunity for me, but it was also really to get away from my mother. So I spent 3 months, 3 full months in Haiti, uh, living a whole different life that I had never experienced. People were calm and peaceful around a lot of missionaries. I wasn't getting beat all the time. I wasn't getting screamed and yelled at. Had nobody trying to jump out of the moving car. It was a whole different experience for me. So it was a really growing experience, and it showed me that there are other ways to live. There are ways to live in peace and happiness and not hair on fire every day, 911. And so coming back from Haiti and entering into my senior year of high school, I was really ready for a change. I saw that things could be different. I saw that I could be happy and not live such a stressful life. So I had, mentally started to figure out how can I change this? How can I change my life and get out of this situation? And I was 18. I turned 18 in November, and in December it was Christmas time. Um, and my mom and my brother and I went Christmas shopping, and an incident happened. It made my mom mad. It was such a minor, minor, minor situation that really no one would think of. There's more detail in the book about it, but it just infuriated her to the point that when we got home, she took me into her bedroom and lined up. She always had a full array of tools to beat you with. My stepfather managed a chain of grocery stores, and so he would break apart those pallets and drill holes in them, and saw them, and he would have one for each kid, different sizes, because we were all four different ages, and they would line them up on the fireplace, and they always stayed on the fireplace mantle. So we always knew that if we did anything wrong, one of those paddles would come off. And my mom because a lot of her abuse was focused on me, she broke a lot of those paddles on me, and my stepfather would make more. But she'd also use belts, her fists, her open hand, the belt buckle side of the belt. My stepfather's, had big belt buckles. He wore cowboy boots and such. So those belt buckle sides, hangers, whatever she could get her hands on, it didn't matter. So, yeah, a whole array of tools, beating tools, and she just started laying into me. This is right before Christmas, and I'll spare you the details, but it was just a horrendous beating yet again. And she had me on all fours and was just railing me. And I thought, as I'm on all fours, I thought, I am 18 years old. I am almost an adult. I have dealt with this for 18 years. This is ridiculous. Like, enough is enough is enough. And I, kind of threw myself up. I was on my knees, threw myself up, you know, um, pushed back and hit her in her legs. It knocked her off balance. I jumped up and I ran out of her bedroom, and she was chasing me, and you get back here, and screaming and grabbing at my hair. I had long hair at the time, grabbing at my hair, trying to get me back in the bedroom. And I just kept running. And I ran out of the front door, and she ran after me. And the second we hit the front yard, there were people hanging Christmas lights and out in the front yard doing different things. The second we hit the yard, her whole attitude changed. She's a good actress. So we hit the front yard, and she's like, "Oh, Kendra, honey, come back. I love you. I'm sorry. Come back." And I just kept running. I did not stop. I had no coat. It was freezing, but I ran, and I didn't stop. And I never went back. And I called my father from a convenience store a couple of miles down the road. Interestingly enough, a little sidebar to this story, as I was leaving our neighborhood and crying, and I was a mess. I was bruised and cut and swollen. I was crying, and I saw my stepfather driving home from work coming around the corner. And so I straightened up and smiled because I didn't want him to stop. And I slowed down my run to just a walk. So he just thought maybe I was taking a walk. And he waved and I waved, and he went on. And then I started hightailing it because I knew it wouldn't be long before he would be coming back after me. And when I got out of the neighborhood and made it to really the main road, I'm walking on the main road, and here comes my stepfather trying to get me to come back home. And he's driving alongside of me with the window rolled down, and, "Come on, get in the car. We'll go back home and talk about it." And I'm just crying and crying. I'm a mess. And I'm like, "No, I'm not getting in the car. I'm not coming back." And a police officer pulls up behind my stepfather, probably thinking, "What is this man doing with this girl?" And he stops us, and he asks what's going on. And my stepfather's like, "Oh, she's upset. We're trying to get her to come back home. Something happened with her mother." And the police officer looked at me, and he said, "How old are you?" I said, 18. And he looked at my stepfather. He said, "Is she 18?" "Yes." And he said, "Well, I can't make her come." So it had literally been, had this happened 5 or 6 weeks before, I would have been forced to go back home because I would have still been 17. So the cop said, "I can't make her go." So my stepfather went home. I don't remember if I walked the rest of the way to the store or if the police officer gave me a ride, but I know when I got there, I was a mess. I was crying, crying, crying. I called my stepfather. I called my father. My mother, my stepmother was home, but my father wasn't. So she came and got me. And when my father got home from work, I showed him. He wanted to see like what she had done, and he was just mortified by the bruises, the cuts, the welts, the swelling everywhere. She pulled my hair out. I sprained my wrist, grazed my head against her bedpost. I was a mess. And so he had her take pictures and said, "We're going to press charges." And I said, I thought about it, and I said, I don't want to do that. I cannot go to court. I cannot deal with her. I just want to, I'm never going back, and I'll be graduating high school soon and going to college. So let's just let it lie. And I never went back. So I spent the rest of my senior year with my father. And then I moved to New York City after high school. And it was incredible. There was some naivety for me, for sure, because there's so much that I didn't know. But it was never an uncomfortable moment of "I'm scared" or "this is too much" or "I'm overwhelmed." I loved it. Like, I loved it. I was so happy to be away from Oklahoma and the drama and my mom and the toxicity, that I just really started soaking it in. And I eventually went to school after I established my residency. I went to college in New York, worked 3 jobs to put myself through college in Manhattan. And during that time, I realized I was gay. And it took me a long time to figure that out because we didn't talk about that in growing up in Oklahoma. We weren't exposed to drugs, we weren't exposed to alcohol or cursing or any of that, or gay. Like, I didn't even know what it was. So I realized I was gay, and so once I realized that, it took me sort of some time to come to terms with that and understand what that meant, but also took some time to figure out how to meet girls to date. Um, but I eventually started dating. I came out. I started dating. I became, involved in the community, in the gay community. I really focused on school and graduating so that I could start building a career. When I finally graduated, I started laser focused on a career. I started in the fashion industry and really did not love it. Just didn't like the environment. But I worked for a few years in the fashion industry, and then I tired of the cold weather after 8 years in New York City and needed a change. And so I moved to Los Angeles for the first time. I've lived there a couple of times. So I moved to LA, and that's where I started in the industry that I'm still in today, and really just started climbing the ladder and working really hard to build my career. I got married to a woman, and unbeknownst to me, she was an addict and an alcoholic. And so she was very abusive, extremely abusive. And she had a daughter, a young daughter that came into my life at 7 years old. So I had a stepdaughter. And it took me 6 years to unwind from that marriage and that relationship, because when you've grown up in an abusive situation and you've been brainwashed by this religion and this cult, your bar and your tolerance for abuse and um, abuse and just insanity is so much higher than everybody else's. So you tend to tolerate a lot more. And I still find myself doing that. And I try hard not to. I try hard to really stay away from toxicity and move myself out of it very quickly once I see it or realize it. But, back then, my bar was so much higher. And I would tell my wife, either you're doing drugs, and because I was very naive to drugs, so I didn't really know what was going on. I said, either you're doing drugs or you have some mental illness, because some of her behaviors reminded me of my mother. Um, Either way, we need to get you help. And she fought against getting help, but she broke my nose on a number of occasions, other bones, my elbow, and she's brutally would beat me. Um, I had to have her arrested. It was yet again another situation of 911 every day. You never knew when it was going to come, but it was going to come, and it was hair on fire. But I loved her. I loved her so much because when she wasn't drunk or high, she was incredible, the most incredible woman, and our love was very deep. And I loved my stepdaughter, so it took me a long time to get out of that and let that go. And so that was heartbreaking for me, absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, one of the jobs that you landed took up much of your time and paid very well, but it wasn't long before you realized that all was not what it seemed. Isn't that right?
That is right. It was my second company in this industry that I worked for. It's been a number of years ago, but in my first company, I worked for them for almost 15 years, and I had climbed the ladder. I had moved a lot for them. Every geographical move was a promotion, a new title, a higher title, bigger financial package. And so I was really focused on climbing that ladder. And I felt like I'd hit a ceiling with the first company, and this second company, the CEO had been reaching out to me for a while, trying to recruit me to be number two under him to run an umbrella of companies. They owned five small companies. Um, so I finally gave in and took the position as executive vice president for this firm, overseeing three of their smaller firms. Um, in the beginning, it went really well, but as time went on, during the first year, I really started to see a lot of the drama that happened within the family and the families of companies. It was five different families that owned these companies together, and it was such a horrible culture. There was so much drama, and they hated each other. These families hated each other, and they were always trying to get each other fired or sue each other, and it was just such a toxic work environment. But again, I go back to that's what I was used to my whole life. So I just tried to stay under the radar and do my best and run these companies the way I needed to, and um, let them deal with their drama. But as time went on, I started to see things that were not right. Aside from the toxicity, I started to see some things that could potentially be illegal activities. And then as those things unfolded to be very clearly illegal activities, I realized I was working for um, a mafia style company. I mean, the illegal activities they were involved in were parallel to the mob, and money laundering and illegal political campaign contributions and pay to play for contracts, and that's the tip of the iceberg. It was pretty crazy. And so as I started to see these things and try to figure them out and try to understand, because again, I was raised very naively, so I wasn't really clear what was going on for a while. I started questioning things and started pushing back on some of their decisions. And that really kind of created a strain between the ownership and the CEO and myself. And so I became very unhappy. Um, I discovered a listening device in my office and remnants of one in my car. And thinking back on it, I thought, you know, when I'm in my car or my home, I'm sure there were some in my home. Uh, I'm thinking that I'm by myself and I'm talking to my friends or the person I'm dating in confidence. And by the time a few months before I had found these listening devices, I was really at a loggerheads with just being very unhappy. And so I would complain and say things to the people, not knowing they were listening, but talk about my work situation and my environment and being very angry about it, and that I left a really upstanding career to come to this kind of a company, and what do I do? What am I going to do? And so I discovered the listening device, and I was very angry about it. Somebody was with me when somebody that I used to work with that I brought up on board with this company was with me when I found it in my office, and he freaked out and he was like, "What kind of company did you bring me to? This is horrible!" And he left a few months later. I had to figure out my exit strategy, so it took me a little longer to leave because you can't just pick up in a small industry and get another job, like that at an executive level. So it took me a little time. About 3 months later, 3 to 4 months later, 3 months later, I started feeling sick. Um, I started developing these symptoms that I had no idea why. It wasn't like a cold or flu. My skin had turned gray. I had sores in my ears and in my throat. My voice got very raspy. I could hardly talk. My eyes became very swollen. I had bad headaches. All my joints ached. I felt horrible, horrible. The right side of my face and head and scalp just burned. I thought my right eye was just going to burn right out of its socket. And I could not figure out what it was. I'd walk around the office and people would say, "What is wrong with you, Kendra?" Just looking at me. And I'd say, I have no idea, but I feel horrible. I feel like I'm going to die. And I started realizing that when I would leave my office and go to a conference room for a meeting, or go out to lunch, that the symptoms would dissipate a little bit. So then I determined it's got to be something in my office. I thought maybe it's black mold or green mold in the vents. So I look in the vents. I kind of look around my office, can't find anything. Never thinking that something was planted there. I just thought there was something in the office coming through the vents or something. So um, these symptoms continue, and about a month and a half later, I dropped something under my desk, and it was always really cold in my office, very, very cold in my office. And so I always had a space heater running up under my desk to try to stay warm. And I always had scarves wrapped around my neck because I have short hair. And so I would always wear a scarf around my neck. And I drop something under my desk, and I go get down under my desk, push the heater aside to get whatever it was. And I look up and I see these pods up under my desk. And so I had been heating up these chemicals that were in these pods for who knows how long and inhaling them. I searched my office. I found one more on my refrigerator. I freaked out. I ran downstairs. I called one of the guys I work with. and told him what I found. And, he had been seeing things too, and we talked about it because we'd worked for a legitimate company before that together. And so we'd been talking a lot about what we were finding and what should we do. Um, I go back upstairs. I have my assistant help me look through the entire office. And it was a huge, I mean, we had half a floor of a Class A office building. So it was a huge office. Um, we looked everywhere and we could not find any other pods except in my office. So knowing how sick I was, I left and we had a corporate apartment in another city. And so I spent time there to get away and spent time, at a friend's house in the East Coast, still working, but just getting away from that environment. And so my symptoms started to dissipate. But when I went back home, when I was in my apartment, they would ramp up. So as it turns out, long story short, they had put poisons in my clothing, in my apartment, I was ingesting them, I was breathing them in. So they were in my car, my apartment, my home, my office. They were everywhere, and I was being inundated with them. And so, as I found them and I removed myself from them, those symptoms started to dissipate. But it was too late. I was exposed to the chemicals for too long, and I don't know exactly how long I was exposed to them, but I was exposed to them too much and too long, and just saturated with them, that it completely killed my immune system. So I started developing all kinds of infections, sinus infections, ear infections, throat infections, UTIs, bladder infections, chest infections. I scratched myself shaving. It turned into this horrible staph infection. I was always in the ER for months because those chemicals just broke down my immune system. So then 4 months later, I started developing a whole new round of symptoms. And those chemical exposure symptoms had dissipated, but I developed a whole new realm of symptoms. I went down to 89 pounds. I lost a lot of weight, went down to 89 pounds. I lost half my hair and developed just a whole arena of symptoms. And so I started seeing doctors and trying to figure it out. And I told them I had been exposed to chemicals, 5 months ago, and that I'd been very sick with fighting infections. And now I have all these new symptoms. And so I was eventually diagnosed with Graves' disease. And Graves' disease is an autoimmune disease that is not curable. You can put it into remission, but it is not curable. And you get Graves' disease either through genetics, which I was not genetically prone to, or there are triggers such as chemical exposure and multiple infections that can trigger Graves' disease. And so I had both of those thanks to those poisons that I was exposed to. So now I had Graves' disease and I had to fight Graves' disease. All this time, I was just focused on staying alive, staying healthy, and trying to get to my exit strategy. So I'd already started negotiating with a new company to leave and work with them, but it took 9 months to do the deal. And that's when I was diagnosed with Graves. So for over a decade, I fought Graves, trying to keep it into remission, and up and down with the symptoms, and it coming out of remission, going into remission. And so just felt sick for over a decade. And I always told my friends early on, if I ever get cancer, it will be because of those poisons, because it doesn't run in my family. And I don't know why I would say that, but I said that to several friends, never thinking I would get cancer, ever, ever, ever thinking I would get cancer. The gestation period for cancer from exposure to chemicals is 7 to 8 years. I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 7.5 years. And I knew it. I knew that I had gotten cancer from those chemicals. I was 100% healthy before I worked for that company. And after they poisoned me, obviously tried to kill me, with all those poisons, my health just went downhill. Graves' disease, cancer, constantly fighting all these symptoms and trying to get better. So I had a double mastectomy. I went through chemotherapy. I had reconstruction. And then it was many years of just trying to get healthy, my body trying to get healthy from the chemo. Chemo really just wrecked my body. But it was an incredible and bizarre challenge to get through. But looking back today, I'm alive and I'm healthy. I'm lucky to be alive. They killed the CEO. They killed one of the CEOs. He's dead. So I'm very lucky that I'm alive.
Well, after one abusive life situation after another, you took a decisive step to heal from all that and change your life. So, talk about that process.
I did. My life had been a cycle of trauma and tragedy, not just in my childhood, but my adulthood. Just trauma after trauma, PTSD, all the while working very hard to build my career and stay on top in my career, which was just a laser focus for me. But 5 years ago, I hit a wall. I hit a wall of being sick physically from all I'd gone through. I hit a wall with being lonely and alone because after almost being murdered, I was scared to death, literally scared to death. So I really shut down. For years, I didn't let people in my house. I didn't make new friends. I didn't associate with people. I moved for work a lot. I moved for work a lot in my career, but each time I would move, I wouldn't make new friends because I would be too scared. So I only associated with the people that I knew before all of that happened. I wouldn't let people in my home. I was very social before. I always threw a lot of parties. I cut all that out. I shut down my social media, didn't let people in my house. I lived in fear. I installed all these security systems. I was always looking over my shoulder and in the rearview mirror. I just lived in complete fear. And I had had enough. I had had enough. And 5 years ago, when I hit that wall, I said, enough is enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I decided I really needed to figure out how I could heal myself in hopes that maybe it would help change that trajectory because I wanted to live out the rest of my life in peace. And I decided I deserved that, not living my life in complete fear and just being sick all the time and just working and being sick, working and being sick. So I started reading and learning and just searching for answers and digging in, trying to figure out how I could heal my mind, my heart, my soul, my body, again, in hopes to change that trajectory. Um, and so some of the things that I did through that process, there were a lot of things that I did, and I talk about some of them in my book. But some of the things that I did was I started practicing gratitude at a whole new level. I'd always been very grateful for my career, for my success, and I never took any of that for granted. But I really started practicing gratitude daily for being grateful for everything. And as a daily reminder, I tattooed on my hand the word lucky so that every day I could remind myself how lucky I am to be alive. So one of the first things I did was really focus on gratitude and made a huge difference. It had a huge difference mentally for me, physically. It increased my endorphins. It's really an incredible. If you don't have a regular practice of gratitude, I would encourage you to consider doing it. You physically will feel better. One of the other things I did was, and this was a tough one for me. I started letting my walls down and letting people back in. I threw a giant party. I called it my year of change in 2019. So 2019 was my year of change, and I was going to do things different, and I was going to heal myself, and I was going to live my life differently. So I threw a giant party. Over 80 people flew in for New Year's Eve party. I threw a huge New Year's Eve party, and some of my friends were like, "I can't believe you're letting all these people in your house." And I'm like, "This is, I'm changing. Like this, I'm changing. This is the new me." And so I started letting those walls down, letting people back into my heart, and letting love back into my heart. And then a third thing that I started doing was practicing forgiveness. And this is probably the hardest for me, but really focusing on forgiveness for all those that hurt me. And there have been so many. Um, and I'm not 100% there yet. It's work that I do every day, but also focusing on forgiveness for myself. And that's the really hard one, but forgiving myself for what happened to my brother, letting go of decades of guilt and shame. And I'm definitely not 100% there yet either, but it is work that I do every day and probably will do for the rest of my life. But those three steps are sort of the baseline of so many other things that I did that really sort of pushed me forward in my healing journey to find peace and health and happiness.
Your new book is entitled I Can't Believe I'm Not Dead, and the subtitle is Escaping Abuse, a Cult, Attempted Murder, and Other Insanities, a story that cannot be true but is. So, was this a cathartic process for you writing this memoir, the difficult memories?
It really was. I don't think I realized how healing it would be, but it was one of the steps that I took to help me heal. People had told me for years, "You have to write a book. You have to write a book," and I'd say, "No, no, I don't have time. Who's going to read it anyway?" But once I was into my path of my healing and really focused on healing myself, it really pulled at me to get it written down on paper, get my whole life written down. So I hired a ghostwriter, and when I hired her, I told her, I don't want to publish this. I just need my insane life documented for me, maybe for my family, maybe for a few friends, but I'm not going to publish this. I just need this documented. And she is a published author. Her name's Jessica Jones. She's an incredible author. She's published her own books. She's worked with Simon and Schuster and Random House. She has ghostwritten a number of books that have been published. So she really knew the process and knew her stuff. So we began in the process, and it took us 3 years to write the book. It was a much longer process than I expected, but it took us 3 years to get it done. And during this process, as we're probably a year into it, she's like, "My God, Kendra, you have to publish this book." And I would say, "No, absolutely not. That makes me too vulnerable. It puts all my business out there. I am not publishing this book." And we'd go on and continue to work on it. And she kept pushing me and kept pushing me. So we're in our second year of working on the book. And I finally said, "Okay, maybe I'll consider it. I will think about it." And the more I thought about it, I thought, there has to be a reason why I am still alive, because I've escaped death many times, a lot more than what we've talked about here, even what's more than what's in the book. But I have been, I've got all these many lives. I just continue to escape death in my past. And I think, why is that? There has to be a greater purpose for me to still be here on this earth. And maybe that purpose is to share my story, and maybe it can help some people. So I finally agreed to publish it, even though I was very trepidatious about it. And she helped me find a publisher, and we published it this year. And it's been an incredible ride. I've had so many people reach out to me that have said, "Your book has helped me so much." The feedback's just been incredible. And there's really three types of people that reach out to me to say thank you for sharing your story. It helped me. And the first is, I can align with some of the things you've been through, and it's so comforting to know that I'm not the only one. Some people who said, "I put some of your practices into play, and they're really helping me." And my favorite, the third of people who reach out to me are people who say, "Wow, my life wasn't so bad. This is the kick in the pants I needed to get up and start appreciating my life and being grateful, and start living my life instead of feeling sorry for myself." So I love all that feedback. I really haven't had any negative feedback, um, but it has just been an incredible journey for me, and I think for a lot of people who have read it. But I guess if I had a message for people, from what I've learned over the last 5 years and really a lifetime, is if you're stuck on the merry-go-round of trauma or tragedy or loss, adversity or heartbreak, you can get off. You can. I did. You can stop that cycle, and you deserve happiness. You deserve peace and health. You deserve not just to survive all the things that you've been through in life, but you deserve to thrive. And for me, the words blessed and fortunate and lucky are synonymous for me, and I'm lucky to be alive. And as a daily reminder that I'm lucky to be alive, I had that word tattooed on my hand so that I will not forget every day to look at it and say, I'm so happy to be here. I'm so fortunate to be here, because there are so many times that I shouldn't be here, but I am. And so really focused on thriving in my life and not just being a survivor. And I think people get so mired down stuck in their trauma and in their tragedy and in their suffering, that they forget to look up and say, "I don't have to live in this. I don't have to be here. I don't have to be stuck." And so learning to get unstuck from that and practicing some of these things that can really bring joy and health and happiness into your life. So critical, so critical. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm grateful for the time and the chance to share my story. Thank you, Mark.
Well, your story really is an incredible one, but also a positive one. Definitely a story that will inspire others to soldier on in the face of adversity. I will leave links to your book, website, and social media in the description below, and hopefully we can have you back on the show in the very near future.
I would love that. I would love to come back. And thank you. This has been so fantastic. I've really enjoyed my time with you. Just as a final thought to all your watchers and listeners is you deserve to not just survive in life, you deserve to thrive. And I wish everyone peace, health, and happiness. Thank you, Mark.